So Hallboro's been kind of a fascinating place. When we discovered it in Providence Gap, it was about that early era when people were coming down from the mountains to the textile factories. And it's become a place that we've gone back to, without songs even. And we've gone back to it in different periods in time. Most recently, for those of you who've been around in Greensboro, Actions and Objectives and Common Enemy, which were in present time. I wanted to take a look at another side of the tracks in Hallboro. And I got really fascinated with the idea of moving away from sort of those big issues of power into kind of the kind of scandalous underbelly of a city, which the big issues of power, of course, there's no scandal or underbelly in that. But I wanted to look at what happens to a community when jobs disappear and when a future disappears, and what happens to a community when a group of people are considered to be waste people, which is an interesting, I don't know if you know the history, when the British started deporting my ancestors, the Scotch-Irish, over here, they were called waste people. The idea was that they would come here, they would work for a few years, and they would die. They would no longer be a burden on the British, and they would have some usefulness in those couple of years in which they were working. So these neighborhoods, there's a neighborhood in Greensboro that I spend a lot of time in because my favorite restaurant in Greensboro is in this neighborhood called Glenwood. And Glenwood is an amazing neighborhood because it's very, very diverse, and it has a lot of poverty, but also a lot of people who are working, and there's a lot of great things that are happening in Glenwood, and there's some things that aren't great that are happening in Glenwood. And I read Teresa Rae Teresa Rae, as it is in French, and it's the only book that I've ever read in my lifetime, and I've read a lot of dark and creepy books, that gave me nightmares. And I was reading that book, and I was eating breakfast in Coliseum Country Cafe. And one day I heard a family talking about selling pot. And I got really fascinated by this idea that there were these stories that I could tell about a neighborhood where the social niceties might not be always present. And the illusion of kind of a Southern gentility might not be there. And I realized that actually was my family, not the family that was talking. But so many of my own relatives who either moved down to Hickory or Greenville, South Carolina, live now in that sort of world. And so I kind of started thinking about that, and the two started playing together, and I decided that I wanted to do an adaptation of Teresa Rae that was rooted deeply and truly in Hallboro. And I wanted to explore this idea of what happens when our passions aren't allowed to be released. And I wanted to explore the idea of what happens when the world you live in is infinitesimally small. I talk to my aunt, Shirley, frequently, and her entire world revolves around what criminal has moved in next door to her, or who's getting a divorce across the street, and what her chihuahua is doing. That is the world that she lives in, and how in that world, how do you make a future in that? How do you live within that with any sort of joy? I also wanted to explore violence a little bit, to explore why it is we as a nation are so violent. Why as a nation and a region, I'm a very proud person who lives in the South. I'm an Appalachian native, and that's different than being a Southerner, but I'm proud to be from the South. And at the same time, I'm very aware that we have these sins within our past, and one of them is our incredible propensity to violence. And why is that? that I think sometimes we simplify it into the issue is purely guns, and it isn't that. There's something in the American character that has a propensity toward violence. And I wanted to kind of get at that, to explore violence. To not have heroes in this play, because even though the people who die aren't necessarily people who we like, always. To see how cruel people can be to each other, and also to explore responsibility within that. And what is it to live within that society, and to play a part in it, and also then share responsibility for living within it. Those are the big thoughts. Mark, we opened with South Pacific this season, which is one of my very favorite of all American plays, and it is a genre that is very popular and people love. And one could argue that we're ending with something really radically different. We're ending with kind of a hard-hitting play that is disturbing and filled with lots of uncomfortable questions. But I argue it is in line with one of the most popular genres that has ever existed in literature. From the broadsheet ballads of the British Isles to novels and true crime novels about murder and betrayal and passion and violence have always fascinated us. I'm very, very interested in how you tell a story that's compelling, that keeps an audience on the edge of their seats, how it is we scare them. There have been a lot of adaptations of Teresa Rae before, and they've all kind of failed. And they've all kind of failed because the second act, the second half of the book is really hard. And so I have taken what I believe is a useful approach, and I've just not cared. I realize that Zola might be upset, but I also realize that he's dead. So I have tried to tell kind of a horror film, in a way, in the second half of this play, and it's still in process. You all are going to be such valuable collaborators and you're all going to be like, God, I wish you'd just write something and not just collaborate all the time when you get the 500th rewrite in this process. But you are going to be such valuable collaborators as we shape how this play develops. But the idea is people are going to be frightened, I hope, and scared and a little creeped out. And all I can say is we're going to jump into this, and it's going to be a little scary, and we're going to deal with some touchy issues, some touchy issues. We're going to deal with sexuality. We're going to deal with a lot of things that mean that we're going to need to create a safe rehearsal hall where we can trust each other. And we have core values here. You can look them up online. I can also tell them what they are, but we're not going to go through all of them. I'm just going to talk about the one collaboration, which is so essential and so important, that we believe truly in that idea of collaboration.